Welcome back to DFC Books. It's absolutely fantastic to have you here with us again.
Yeah, it really is great to be back.
We are diving into the archives today, into the minds of giants, really. And honestly, this is the part of my week I always look forward to the most.
Same here.
But before we even crack the spine of today's selection, and trust me, it is a heavy one, I actually have a massive favor to ask of you listening right now.
We really need your input.
We do. We absolutely do. Because we love doing these deep dives. And, we have a long list of our own favorites that we want to get through, but we really want to know what you want to hear.
Exactly. What is actually sitting on your nightstand right now?
Right. Or what classic have you, always pretended to have read at parties but never actually opened?
Oh, we all have those.
Definitely. So jump into the comments section wherever you are listening or watching this right now and drop a specific book request for a future deep dive.
We read every single one of those comments.
Every single one. We love seeing the variety, and we really want to tackle the books that are keeping you up at night.
Absolutely. The list we have is growing, and some of the suggestions from you guys have been brilliant so far. But there is always room for a challenge.
Oh, for sure.
And speaking of challenges, we have a pretty monumental one today.
We really, really do. Today, we are walking straight into the storm. We are tackling Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil.
A huge one.
And I have to say, just holding this book, it feels a little intimidating. Not physically. I mean, it's not a massive doorstop, but the atmosphere of it. The subtitle alone is Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future. That's a bold claim.
It is extremely bold.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that when Nietzsche says prelude, he isn't suggesting a soft introduction.
Right.
He isn't easing us in at all. He is clearing the ground.
Yeah.
He is basically bringing in the demolition crew to knock down all the old structures of Western thought.
Plato and Christianity and all that.
Exactly. Modern democracy, too.
Mm.
He wants to knock it all down to make room for something entirely new.
Right. But here's the thing that completely blew my mind when I was looking into the background of this text for our deep dive today. We think of Nietzsche today as this absolute titan of philosophy, right?
The quintessential philosopher.
Yeah, the guy who influenced existentialism and psychology and postmodernism. I mean, you see his face and his quotes on memes and T-shirts all over the internet.
You really do.
But when this actual book came out back in 1886... nothing.
Absolute silence.
Yeah.
It was a complete and utter commercial disaster.
A total disaster. Nietzsche actually had to publish it at his own expense because no one else would touch it.
Which is wild to think about now.
Totally wild. He hoped to sell maybe 300 copies just to cover his printing costs. And
Right.
do you know how many he actually sold in the first year?
It was painfully low.
114 copies. That is it.
And I believe he ended up giving away quite a few of those, too.
Yeah, he gave away 66 copies out of his own stash to friends and reviewers, just begging them to read it. So barely anyone actually bought this book. He writes this letter to his friend where he says, essentially, they don't want my literature, and I can no longer afford the luxury of print.
That is just heartbreaking.
It really is. But it's also wild considering we're sitting here talking about it 140 years later as if it's the foundation of modern thought.
Well, that stark contrast is really central to understanding Nietzsche as a person. He wasn't writing for his contemporaries. He explicitly stated multiple times that he felt he was born posthumously.
Like his time hadn't come yet.
Exactly. He knew his work was essentially a time bomb. And Beyond Good and Evil is arguably the fuse that lights that bomb.
So for you listening, what is the mission of this deep dive today? Because this isn't a book you just browse through casually while you're waiting for the bus or zoning out on a Sunday.
No, definitely not. And Nietzsche actually explicitly warned us about that in the text. He says this is not a book for browsing. Our mission today is to unpack the truly dangerous ideas he planted in these pages.
Dangerous is the right word.
It is. Nietzsche is challenging you to look beyond the comfortable binary of what we call good and what we call evil. He wants us to understand the underlying psychology, the hidden drives behind our morals and our religion, and even our philosophy.
It almost feels like he's trying to peel back the skin of civilization just to show us the raw muscles and veins pumping underneath.
That is a very Nietzschean image, actually. He wants to show that what we typically call virtue or truth is very often just a mask for something else entirely.
Something a lot more primal.
Precisely. He is inviting us to look at the actual machinery of human nature but without all the sentimental gloss that we usually paint over it.
Okay, let's start unpacking this, because to really get a handle on this book, I think we need to understand the cast of characters first.
Absolutely.
And I don't mean a narrative plot, of course, because this is a work of philosophy, but he definitely uses these distinct archetypes that he drags onto the stage to either critique or praise.
He relies heavily on archetypes. And the first one, the main antagonist of the book, if you want to frame it that way, is the dogmatic philosopher.
The primary target of his ridicule.
Oh, completely. Nietzsche thinks traditional philosophers, guys like Plato or Descartes or the Stoics,
Yeah.
he thinks they were just clumsy.
Clumsy and superstitious.
Right. They talk about having this immediate certainty, like Descartes famously saying, I think, therefore I am. Nietzsche looks at that concept of immediate certainty, and he just laughs at it.
He actually has this brilliant metaphor right in the preface. He compares truth to a woman.
Yes. Supposing truth is a woman, what then?
And his overall point there is that these traditional dogmatic philosophers are just terrible at dating.
Essentially, yes. He literally calls them clumsy lovers. They don't understand how to win her over at all.
They come on way too strong.
Exactly. They try to force the truth into these rigid, dogmatic systems that they've invented. They want the entire world to fit into their neat little logical box.
But truth doesn't work that way.
No. In Nietzsche's view, truth is far more elusive, and she's probably just mocking them for their clumsiness. They approach her with this incredibly heavy, serious dogmatism, and truth just slips right away from them.
So the dogmatic philosopher is the old guard, the antagonist. So who is the hero here? Who is the protagonist of Nietzsche's future?
Nietzsche calls them the new philosophers. Or perhaps more famously, he calls them the free spirits.
The attempters.
Yes, Versucher in the original German. It's a really brilliant play on words, actually. It translates directly to attempters or experimenters, but it can also mean tempters. These are the philosophers of the future.
How does he describe them? Because they definitely don't sound like your standard university professors sitting around in tweed jackets smoking pipes.
Definitely not. He says these free spirits are friends of solitude. They are hard. They are demanding. They really don't care if the masses understand them. In fact, they probably prefer if the masses do not understand them at all. They don't just sit around studying existing values. They actually create new values.
There was this one visual he used in the text that I completely loved. He compares these new philosophers to the Sipo matador.
Ah, yes, the Sipo matador. That is a fascinating metaphor.
It's this parasitic vine in Java, right?
Yes, it is.
It's this vine that wraps around and climbs up a massive oak tree. It uses the tree as a structural support to get high enough so it can finally unfold its own crown up in the open sunlight.
Right.
It's literally using the old established structure to reach entirely new heights, but it's doing so in a way that's dangerous and inherently parasitic.
It is. And that's the crucial key to understanding this archetype. The new philosopher isn't a nice person by conventional standards. They are perfectly willing to use the existing structures, meaning society and culture and old philosophies, to propel themselves above everything else.
They use the host to survive.
Yes, they want the open air and the dangerous freedom at the top. They don't want the safety of the roots down below in the dirt. They are fundamentally willing to destroy the old world to create their new one.
Okay, so we have the clumsy dogmatist and we have the dangerous free spirit. Then he introduces a third type, the objective man. And I feel like this is an archetype we actually see a ton of today. You know, the unbiased scholar or the completely neutral observer.
Nietzsche is incredibly critical of this type. He admits the objective man has his uses. He's a very good tool for measuring things and gathering data. But he argues that the objective man completely lacks substance.
He calls him a mirror, right?
Yes, a mirror. He reflects absolutely everything around him, but he possesses no personality or core of his own. Nietzsche says they are selfless, but not in some grand, heroic way. They are selfless simply because they have no self left to speak of.
Wow.
He calls them precious, easily injured instruments.
Ouch. So being purely objective and unbiased is actually a sign of total weakness for Nietzsche.
It's a sign of a massive lack of will. You aren't imposing your own form or vision on the world. You're just sitting there letting the world reflect off of you.
Just reacting.
Right. The objective man waits around for something to happen so he can meticulously record it.
Yeah.
But the free spirit actually makes things happen.
That makes sense. And then, of course, we have to talk about the majority, the final archetype, the herd man.
The vast, vast majority of humanity. The herd man is entirely driven by fear. They want security and comfort, and what Nietzsche rather famously calls green pasture happiness.
Green pasture happiness. I mean, I have to say that sounds kind of nice.
It sounds nice to us because we are, in many ways, the direct heirs of this herd mentality.
Yeah.
But to Nietzsche, this desire for green pastures is the absolute end of all human greatness.
He says it's too safe.
Exactly. The herd man values concepts like equality and pity, primarily because they are utterly terrified of suffering. They are terrified of anything that is dangerous or distinct or exceptional.
They want everyone to be exactly the same.
Yes, so that no one can ever hurt them or make them feel inferior.
We're definitely going to get much deeper into that herd morality a bit later because that is an incredibly spicy topic. But before we leave the character section, we have to mention a few of the historical cameos he throws in. Nietzsche loves to drop names, and he has some serious hot takes on historical figures.
He certainly does. He frequently uses real historical figures as case studies for these philosophical types he's building.
Let's start with Socrates. Usually, philosophers absolutely revere Socrates. He's the undisputed godfather of Western thought. But Nietzsche just blatantly calls him a plebeian.
He does. He calls him a plebeian who used his irony to trick the noble Athenians.
Tricked them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nietzsche actually sees Socrates as the beginning of the end for the great, tragic, noble Greek culture that came before him. He says Socrates was a great ironic death who internally realized that all moral judgments were actually completely irrational.
But he hid it.
Right. He tricked himself, and he tricked everyone else in Athens into following this new idol called reason just to tame their wild instincts.
So Socrates is essentially the guy who ruined the best party ever by turning on all the bright fluorescent lights and asking everyone for a strict logical definition of what a party is.
That is a remarkably apt analogy, actually. Nietzsche genuinely thinks Socrates introduced this toxic idea that reason is inherently superior to instinct. And for Nietzsche, that marks the start of humanity's cultural decline.
Okay, then there's Cesar Borgia. Now, historically, Borgia was a Renaissance nobleman, a warlord, and pretty much a violent psychopath by any modern standard we have today. Yet Nietzsche calls him a man of prey and seems to admire him.
Yes, and this specific point is very often misunderstood by casual readers.
Yeah.
Nietzsche isn't saying, hey, everyone go out and be a violent murderer exactly like Borgia.
Right.
But he looks at Borgia and he sees what he calls a healthy tropical growth. Borgia was a human being who completely refused to deny his own instincts.
He's just acted on them.
Fully. He was dangerous and he was a beast of prey, but he was alive in a vibrant, vital way that the modern herd man is absolutely not. Nietzsche is deeply fascinated by that raw, uninhibited will. He sees a vitality in Borgia that he firmly believes modern Europe has completely lost.
And finally, there's a group he discusses with a lot of historical complexity, the Jews.
This is a crucial point to get right because, as we know, Nietzsche was later heavily misappropriated by anti-Semites in the 20th century. But if you actually read this text, he vehemently attacks anti-Semites.
Right, we need to be clear about that.
Yes. However, his historical analysis of the Jewish people in antiquity is incredibly sharp. He initially describes them as a people born for slavery, referencing the Roman historian Tacitus, but then he completely flips the script.
How so?
He calls them the chosen people because they managed to pull off the absolute greatest magic trick in human history, what he terms the inversion of values.
This is what he calls the slave rebellion in morals, right?
Exactly that. Nietzsche credits the ancient Jewish prophets with taking the concepts of rich and godless and violent and fusing them all into one new category called evil.
Right.
And then they took the concepts of poor and sick and suffering and fused those into the category of good and holy.
I flipped the board.
They managed to convince the entire world that the weak were actually the good people and the strong were the evil people. Nietzsche thinks this was a stroke of absolute historical genius. A miraculous feat, even if he ultimately completely despises the outcome it had on human development.
It's so fascinating that he sees that ideological shift purely as a feat of power. Like, it took an incredible amount of sheer will to flip the moral script of the universe like that.
Precisely. To him, it was an act of profound spiritual warfare that eventually defeated the entire Roman Empire. The weak defeated the strong, not with swords, but by changing the very definition of what the word good meant.
Okay, so the stage is fully set now. We have our primary characters and our historical examples. Now let's go through the book itself, chapter by chapter, or at least hit the major movements.
Sounds good.
It starts with part 1, which is titled On the Prejudices of Philosophers. And man, he drops a massive bomb right in the very first section. He immediately attacks the will to truth.
He asks a fundamental question that no one had really ever dared to ask before him. He says, why do we want truth at all? And even more importantly, he asks, why not untruth? Why not uncertainty?
I mean, on its face, that sounds insane to a modern listener. Why would anyone actively want untruth?
Because untruth might actually be far more life-preserving. Nietzsche argues that the things of the highest value to us, meaning life and survival and power, might actually fundamentally depend on deception.
Like, we need lies to survive.
Exactly. Maybe we absolutely need illusions to keep going. He says the falseness of a judgment is not necessarily an objection to a judgment. The only question that actually matters is, does this judgment advance life?
So if believing a complete lie actually makes you stronger and more vital, Nietzsche says go ahead and believe the lie.
Or, at the very least, we should acknowledge that the objective truth might be deadly to us. If the ultimate truth of the universe is just that it's a cold, uncaring, empty void, then maybe believing in a warm, caring deity is what helps you survive and thrive.
That makes a lot of sense.
He also completely deconstructs the concept of the I. We all naturally think I am thinking. I am the conscious agent of my own thoughts.
Right, like I decided to eat a sandwich today.
Nietzsche says not so fast. He argues that a thought comes when it wishes, not when I wish. He claims the ego itself is just a superstition. He says it's purely a grammatical illusion to think there is a distinct doer hiding behind the deed. The thinking itself is the deed. There is no separate I doing the thinking.
That is incredibly trippy. So I'm not actively thinking. My thoughts thinking is just an event that is happening to me?
In a sense, yes. It's a complex play of underlying drives and forces within you. And this directly leads into his most famous philosophical concept, which he introduces right here in part 1, the will to power.
The big one, the core of his whole project.
Exactly. He proposes that absolutely all of our drives, hunger, sex, logic, the desire to do philosophy, they're all just different masks and forms of the will to power.
It's the baseline operating system.
It is the fundamental energy of the entire universe for him. It's not just about mere survival like Darwin argued. For Nietzsche, mere survival is just the lowest possible common denominator.
Life wants more than just to not die.
Yes. Life fundamentally wants to expand. It wants to overcome obstacles. It wants to appropriate its environment.
So even when a humble philosopher sits there and says, I am purely seeking the objective truth, they're actually just exercising their own will to power.
Exactly. They are trying to impose their specific spiritual will and framework onto the entire world. They want to be the absolute Caesars of the concept, as he puts it. This is why Nietzsche says psychology should be recognized as the true queen of the sciences, because it's the only tool that uncovers these hidden primal drives.
Okay, moving right along to part 2, titled The Free Spirit. We talked about these specific characters a bit earlier, but in this chapter he really dives into the critique of independence. He says true independence is actually incredibly dangerous.
He has this haunting line where he says it is a test taken before no witnesses.
That is heavy.
If you really decide to break away from the herd and from the common values of your society, you are utterly alone. There is no crowd there to applaud you for your bravery. If you stumble and fall, there's absolutely no one to catch you.
And he really violently goes after the people in his own time who boldly call themselves free spirits, the Democrats and the early socialists. He refers to them as levelers.
This is where Nietzsche gets highly political, but in his own strange anti-political way. He absolutely despises these levelers. These are the people who constantly scream for equality of rights and for deep sympathy for all that suffers.
Which again to us sounds like a good thing.
It does. But Nietzsche thinks they are actually the ultimate enemies of life itself.
Why, though? What is fundamentally wrong with sympathy in his eyes?
Nietzsche argues that deep suffering is strictly necessary for human elevation. He asks rhetorically the discipline of great suffering. Do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements of man so far?
So suffering is the forge.
Yes. The levelers just want to completely abolish suffering. They want to make absolutely everyone safe and equal and comfortable. Nietzsche says if you successfully abolish suffering, you simultaneously abolish the immense pressure that creates human greatness.
You lose the diamonds.
Precisely. You turn all of mankind into sand. Just small and soft and perfectly round and identical.
So he genuinely sees the entire democratic movement not as a sign of historical progress, but as a severe decline.
He sees it as the direct secular heir to Christianity. Yeah. It is just a collective desire to become a herd animal. He wants distinctiveness in humanity. He actively wants a vast distance between the high types and the low types. He wants the jagged mountain peaks, not the comfortable flatlands.
Which brings us perfectly to part 3, titled What is Religious? Now, Nietzsche is obviously incredibly famous for the phrase, God is dead, though, just as a quick side note, that quote is actually from a different book, The Gay Science.
Good.
But here in Beyond Good and Evil, he mostly treats religion as a pragmatic tool.
He is very deeply pragmatic about how religion functions in society. He says for the ruling class, religion is just a fantastic means to control the masses. It teaches the ruled classes to be perfectly content with their lowly, miserable station in life.
It gives suffering a meaning.
Yes, it gives them a supernatural reason to suffer quietly. It tells them your agonizing suffering here on earth simply doesn't matter because you will be infinitely rewarded in the next life.
So religion is just a massive pacifier for society.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
But Nietzsche argues the real danger comes when religion becomes sovereign, when it stops being a useful tool for the rulers and actually becomes the ultimate ruler itself.
When the tool takes over the master.
Exactly. And Nietzsche argues that Christianity specifically has systematically preserved the failures of humanity.
The failures. That's a strong word.
He uses it very deliberately.
Yeah.
By failures, he means the sick, the weak, the chronically suffering. In a purely natural state, nature would normally just weed them out. But the sovereign religion steps in and says, no, these specific people are the chosen ones of God. We must dedicate all our resources to care for them.
And he thinks that's bad for the species.
He argues this dynamic has artificially kept the entire human species trapped on a lower evolutionary rung. It has actively prevented the organic development of a much higher, more powerful type of man.
That is incredibly harsh to a modern ear.
It is incredibly harsh. There's no getting around that.
Yeah.
But Nietzsche isn't looking for kindness or charity at all. He is solely looking for the ultimate elevation of the human species.
Right.
In this section, he also mentions the archetype of the saint, this extreme figure of religious self-denial. He notes that powerful rulers are often deeply fascinated by the saint.
Why would a king care about a starving saint?
Because the king senses a massive will to power in the saint's terrifying ability to completely deny his own basic human instincts. Even in total self-denial, there is a massive flex of pure willpower.
That makes total sense. It's like the ultimate flex. I am so unbelievably strong that I can literally starve my own body to death and not break my resolve.
Exactly. It's undeniable proof that the internal will can be stronger than the physical body itself.
Let's move along to part 5, titled The Natural History of Morals. This is where he really dives into the concept of fear.
Yes, he states that fear is the mother of morals. This is a crucial takeaway for anyone trying to understand Nietzsche. He forcefully argues that human morality isn't some objective, unchanging command handed down from God on a stone tablet.
It's biological almost.
He calls morality a sign language of the emotions. And specifically, he argues that what we call herd morality is entirely based on collective fear.
How does that work exactly?
Think about what the common herd organically labels as evil. They call the dangerous man evil. The man who is highly unpredictable or exceptionally strong or severe in his actions.
Why do they do that?
Simply because he directly threatens the safety and stability of the herd.
So what do they label as good then?
The exact opposite. The modest, the pitiable, the safe. The man who is fundamentally harmless. Nietzsche points out that under the dominance of herd morality, the concept of good eventually just becomes completely synonymous with being stupid or just being nice.
Nice is the ultimate compliment now.
Right. It's just a massive collective social pact to abolish fear from daily life.
And he connects this right back to the democratic movement again.
Yes, he absolutely does. He says the modern democratic movement is just the direct biological inheritance of the Christian movement. It's the exact same underlying drive at play. The drive to make the entire world completely safe for the weakest members.
To pad all the sharp corners.
Exactly. To pull all the sharp teeth out of the dangerous predatory animals. To literally turn wild wolves into obedient domestic dogs.
Okay, moving to part 6, titled We Scholars. Here, he draws a very sharp distinction between the mere scholar and the true philosopher. And once again, poor Immanuel Kant gets an absolute kicking from Nietzsche.
Always. Kant is his favorite punching bag. Nietzsche says that scholars and even the great famous system builders like Kant and Hegel are ultimately just philosophical laborers.
Laborers, like factory workers of the mind.
Exactly. Their entire job is just to organize past knowledge. They look backwards at what has already happened in human history, and they try to categorize it and make rational sense of it.
They write the encyclopedias.
Right. He calls them the inventory clerks of the human spirit.
But the true philosopher, in his view, does something else.
The true philosopher is a commander and a legislator. They don't just sit there and say, this is how the world is currently. They stand up and command, thus it shall be.
That is a huge difference.
Massive. Their personal will to truth is overtly a will to power. They're actively creating the future. They operate more like artists, really molding the clay of humanity into new shapes.
That sounds both exhausting and incredibly dangerous for everyone else.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche explicitly asks in the text, are there actually such philosophers alive today? And he heavily implies that the answer is no, but that he and others are waiting for them to arrive.
All right, now we arrive at part 7, titled Our Virtues. And folks listening, you might want to buckle up for this one, because this is the specific section that gets extremely uncomfortable for modern readers. He tackles pity, and he tackles women.
And just to remind you, we have to report this neutrally. This is simply what is written in the historical text.
Right, we are just the messengers trying to unpack the source material here.
Exactly. So first, Nietzsche completely critiques the concept of pity as a profound weakness. He argues mathematically almost that pity simply increases the total amount of suffering in the world.
Because it spreads the pain around.
Yes. If you are suffering and I pity you, I am now suffering along with you. So now there are two people suffering needlessly instead of just one.
He also thinks the act of pitying someone is inherently condescending, right?
He does. He says the truly noble soul does not pity people. The noble soul respects people. Pity is an emotion strictly reserved for the herd.
And regarding his views on women, well, this is where he openly discusses what he calls the uglification of Europe.
Yes. He makes the very controversial claim that as women seek equal rights and higher education, they are actually unlearning their true innate power.
His argument, which again is highly controversial, is that woman's historical power over men actually came from her wildness, her potential for real emotional danger, her distinct fundamental difference from man.
Right. And by actively trying to become equal or self-reliant in the exact same manner that men are to help reign, Nietzsche argues that women are simply becoming boring.
He even uses the phrase the borification of woman, and he talks about the horned animal.
Yes, the horned animal metaphor. He argues that historically men were deeply attracted to the inherent danger present in women, the unpredictability.
Like taming a wild animal.
That's his framing, yes.
Yeah.
He says if you remove that danger through societal equality, you completely remove the magic of the dynamic. He directly compares the modern feminist movement of his day to the democratic movement.
It's all connected for him.
It is. He sees it all as just another systemic attempt to level everything down, to completely remove the natural tension and conflict that makes human life interesting and vital.
Again, we're just laying out the arguments here, but it perfectly fits his overall overarching theme. In Nietzsche's worldview, equality of any kind is always bad, while distinctness and hierarchy and tension are always good.
Exactly. He looks out and he sees the modern push for broad equality as a terrifying descent into mass mediocrity. Whether that leveling happens between economic classes or between the sexes, he deeply fears a future world where absolutely everyone is just a tepid, similar, boring shade of beige.
Which naturally leads us right into the grand finale of his entire argument. Part 9, titled What is Noble? This is where he fully defines master versus slave morality.
If you take nothing else away from this book, this is the core engine of everything he's saying. Nietzsche argues that historically there are two completely fundamental types of human morality.
Master and slave.
Yes, master morality historically originates in the powerful ruling classes. For the ancient masters, the concept of good meant being noble and powerful and high-minded and rich.
And what did bad mean to them?
Bad simply meant being common or cowardly or humble.
Notice there that he specifically uses the word bad and not the word evil.
That is a wildly crucial distinction. For the master type, the bad man is just someone who is completely contemptible. He's completely beneath the master's notice.
Like a bug on a windshield.
Or like a bad weather day. You don't actively hate the rain, you just deal with it and ignore it.
Right.
But for slave morality, which obviously originates down in the oppressed lower classes, the entire focus is projected outwardly onto the oppressor.
They define themselves against the master.
Exactly. The slaves look up at the master, this powerful, violently dangerous man, and they label him as evil.
So the very concept of evil is entirely a creation of the slave mind.
100% yes. Evil is simply the slave's resentful word for the master. And only after they invent evil does the slave then invent a corresponding good to contrast with it.
Which is themselves.
Right. The harmless kind, safe, passive man.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, master morality basically says, I am good, therefore you who are weak are bad. And slave morality says, you are evil, therefore I who am weak must be good.
That is a perfect summary. Master morality is entirely self-affirming. It starts with the self. Slave morality is entirely reactive. It only exists as a resentful reaction against the strong.
And in this section, Nietzsche drops this single line that just hits you like a Mack truck. He writes, simply, life is exploitation.
He absolutely refuses to sugarcoat the reality of nature. He argues that exploitation isn't some unfortunate modern corruption of human society. It is the very essence of being a living organism.
Every plant and animal does it.
Yes. Every single living thing instinctively tries to appropriate its surroundings, to overpower its rivals, and to expand its own footprint. To deny this basic fact is to deny life itself.
So telling people not to exploit each other is telling them to die.
According to him, yes. To say don't exploit is biologically equivalent to saying don't live.
And the noble soul he talks about, how do they fit into this brutal reality?
The noble soul possesses what he beautifully calls the pathos of distance.
The pathos of distance.
It deliberately looks down from its height. It fully acknowledges and embraces the natural hierarchy of the world. But most importantly, it has deep reverence for itself.
It doesn't need applause.
Right. It does not need the common herd to validate it or tell it that it's good.
Yeah.
It simply knows it is good because it is overflowing with power and vitality and active energy.
It's a philosophical framework that just completely and utterly rejects the modern world's total obsession with external validation and absolute equality.
It creates a sense of intellectual vertigo when you really read it.
Yeah.
He is basically asking the reader to go stand on the edge of a massive cliff and stare straight down.
Okay, well, we have been staring directly into that abyss for quite a while now. Let's actually take a quick breath.
That is probably a very good idea.
While you listening at home are mentally digesting all of that, the will to power, the herd mentality, the master and slave morality, I just want to ask you to do one very small thing for us.
Just takes a second.
If you are enjoying this deep dive today, and if you want to actively support DFC Books,
Right.
please just take out your phone and hit that subscribe button on your podcast app or on YouTube.
It really is the best way to support us.
It truly helps us keep the studio lights on, and it guarantees we can keep bringing these dangerous historical ideas right to your ears.
And it ensures you don't accidentally miss our next deep dive, which I promise might be just as provocative as this one.
Exactly. So just hit subscribe right now. We'll wait for a second. Okay, we're back.
All right, now we need to go even deeper into the text.
Let's do it.
We've covered all the main structural arguments, but there is so much vital nuance in this book that completely gets lost when people just skim the Wikipedia summary.
I think one of the absolute biggest historical misconceptions out there is about his views on nationalism.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because we all know historically the Nazis absolutely loved Nietzsche. They famously printed special editions of his books and put them directly in the German soldiers' knapsacks during the war.
They did.
But if you actually sit down and read Beyond Good and Evil, page by page, he actively mocks German nationalists constantly.
Relentlessly mocks them. In section 251 specifically, he explicitly talks about what he calls the attacks of habitation, which is just a fancy word for profound stupidity that are currently passing over the German spirit.
Right.
And he lists them out. He lists anti-French stupidity, anti-Jewish stupidity, and Teutonic stupidity.
He literally calls anti-Semitism a stupidity in print.
He absolutely does. He entirely despises the pathetic narrow-mindedness of tribal prejudice. Instead of a nationalist, he actively praises the concept of the good European.
Who exactly is the good European in his mind?
It's an individual who has successfully risen completely above petty artificial national borders. Someone who is highly culturally mixed, broad-minded, and intellectually nomadic.
Like a citizen of the continent.
Exactly. Nietzsche himself actually felt far more at home interacting with French culture than he ever did with German culture in many ways. He saw modern nationalism as just another pathetic form of herd mentality. He famously warned against staying stuck to a fatherland.
Right, I remember that quote. Not to remain stuck to a fatherland, even if it suffers most.
It's a brutal demand. He demands that we must sever our own hearts from the very things we love the most, if those things are ultimately holding us back from greatness. He wants us to be entirely free of that blind tribal attachment.
Another really deep recurring theme in the book is this fascinating concept of the mask. We touched on it briefly earlier, but it really is everywhere in the text. He says, every deep spirit needs a mask.
This directly connects back to the intense loneliness of the free spirit we discussed. Nietzsche firmly believes that if you are a truly profound thinker, you simply cannot be understood by the common masses.
It's impossible.
Yes. If you somehow tried to show them your true, authentic self, they would either violently destroy you out of fear, or they would completely misunderstand you and turn you into a cartoon.
So what do? You wear a mask.
You wear a mask to interact with the world.
So what does that look like? Do you pretend to be the objective man we talked about earlier? Or do you act like the village buffoon?
Sometimes, yes. He actually notes that the high spirits of kindness may frequently look like pure malice to an untrained eye.
Or vice versa.
Exactly. Sometimes a profound philosopher deliberately acts shallow or frivolous just to hide their real terrifying depth from normal people.
Right.
He talks at length about how a person who is secretly striving for some massive world historical goal ends up considering everyone else around them as merely a means to an end, a temporary delay, or a brief resting place.
They use people.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And until he finally reaches that ultimate goal, he wears a pleasant mask of graciousness so no one stops him.
It's essentially philosophical protective coloring.
Precisely. The mask protects the vulnerable philosopher from the violent herd, but it also simultaneously protects the fragile herd from the blinding, dangerous truth that the philosopher is carrying.
That is incredible. And this really naturally leads into the final nuance I want to cover today. The genuine danger of being the free spirit.
It is not a romantic path.
No. I think a lot of people read Nietzsche in college and they immediately think, yeah, I'm totally a free spirit. I don't follow the rules. I do whatever I want.
Or everyone thinks they're the free spirit.
Right. But when Nietzsche actually describes the reality of it, he makes it sound utterly terrifying.
Because it is. It is not a fun weekend romp. He literally calls it a strange and insane task.
An insane task. That's his phrasing.
Think about it. If you actually succeed in totally stripping away the foundational morality of your entire society, the comforting religion of your parents, the political safety nets of your age, what is actually left for you to stand on?
Nothing. You are just floating in a void.
Exactly.
You severely risk becoming a permanent prisoner of your own intellectual detachment.
Exactly that. He vividly describes what he calls the danger of the flyer. The bird that manages to fly higher than all the others obviously sees vastly more of the world.
But the air is thin.
It is. It is vastly colder up there.
Yeah.
It is more intensely isolated, and you are completely misunderstood by absolutely everyone standing on the ground below.
And if you fall, you die.
Yes. Nietzsche freely admits that the ambitious free spirit might simply be destroyed by the crushing weight of this solitude. There is a very profound, deep melancholy woven throughout this entire book. He fully knows that the demanding path he is prescribing is almost entirely impossible for a normal human being to actually walk without breaking.
It's almost like he's forcefully inviting us to become gods, but he painfully knows we're still basically just slightly evolved apes in the end.
And that exact tension right there is the fundamental tragedy of the entire book. He absolutely loves the theoretical potential of what man could be, but he utterly despises the physical reality of what man currently is.
Man, that is heavy. So considering all of this, what does this actually mean for us today? We've thoroughly unpacked his characters, we've gone through the main arguments, and we've explored the historical nuances. Ultimately, why does beyond good and evil still fundamentally matter right now?
I think it matters deeply because it remains the ultimate intellectual antidote to modern complacency.
Complacent.
We currently live in a global culture that is extremely, very sure of its own modern moral values. We confidently think that concepts like democracy and absolute equality and public safety and universal pity are just objectively good things, factually good.
Beyond questioning.
Right. And Nietzsche basically reaches out, grabs us fiercely by the collar, and yells, "Are you really sure about that?"
He demands that we justify it.
He completely forces us to stop and ask, are these modern values actually serving to elevate human life? Or are they quietly just protecting our own collective physical and mental weakness?
That is the big question.
Are we all just hiding behind this noble word morality simply because we are deeply afraid to be dangerous and exceptional?
He relentlessly asks us to look at the why. Why do we truly fundamentally believe the things we claim to believe?
And that aggressively brings us right back to his incredible opening question from part 1. Why do we run truth at all? Maybe the genuinely most important things in human life aren't the safe, comfortable, objective truths. Maybe the only things that matter are the highly dangerous, deeply creative risks we take.
It's a massive, uncompromising call to constant self-overcoming, to completely refuse to be satisfied with just being another herd man eating grass in the green pasture.
Exactly. To quote him one last time, Not to remain stuck to a person, not even the most loved. Not to remain stuck to a fatherland. One must know how to conserve oneself.
One must know how to conserve oneself. That is the ultimate final challenge he leaves us with. Conserve your own true spirit. Actually build your own internal values from scratch.
Yes.
Even if undertaking that project is incredibly socially dangerous. Even if you are forced to wear a mask in public just to survive the process.
And finally, to accept the terrifying possibility that perhaps our highest cherished virtues, our honesty, our compassion, our pity, are really just superficial foreground estimates.
Just paint on the surface.
Exactly. They are just the surface mask. The real foundational game running underneath everything is always the will to power.
Well, that is a truly provocative thought to leave you with today. Are you currently wearing a mask? Or are you simply just a fragile mirror passively reflecting everyone else around you?
That is exactly the question you have to ask yourself tonight.
Thank you so much for tuning in to DFC Books today. This has been a massive, heavy lift of an episode, but I honestly feel significantly intellectually stronger for having done it.
Well, as Nietzsche himself would famously say, what does not kill me makes me stronger.
Exactly. Go out there, read the dangerous books, challenge your own assumptions, and we will absolutely see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.